Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Membeis. Right on top of the Amud says the Gemara, Lememra de Shmuel, Kirab Shimon Svirle. Lememra, do you propose, do you indeed hold that Shmuel concurs with Reb Shimon? He holds like the opinion of Reb Shimon with regards to the halacha of davar she'ein miskaven is mutter. If one does a ma'isa, an act which results in a subsequent malacha being performed without his intention, he has no kavanah to do that. His kavanah is intention to merely do the primary act, but not the secondary act. According to Reb Shimon, davar she'ein miskaven is mutter. Do you propose indeed that Shmuel agrees with that? Because Shmuel tells us one may take a hot kettle which was emptied of its contents and pour into it cold water for the sake of warming up that water somewhat. Hefsheroi lahafshir. He's merely warming it up. It's not getting hot enough to be considered mevushal. So that is allowed. Shmuel says that is allowed even if perhaps this will result in galvanizing the kettle, in hardening it, in doing a malach of mitzaref, because that's not his intention, it's not his kavanah. And Shmuel concurs with Shittas Reb Shimon that davar she'ein miskaven is mutter. Says Gemara, indeed is that so? Lememra, do you propose the Shmuel Reb Shimon Svirle that he follows Reb Shimon's shita? But how does this fit with another ruling of Shmuel? V'amar Shmuel, didn't Shmuel tell us? Mechabin gacheles shel mateches b'shus harabim. One can extinguish a glowing piece of metal in rishus harabim b'shvil shlo yizoiku barabim, on account of public safety, so that it shouldn't pose a danger to the rabbim, to the passerby in rishus harabim. So you may be mechabed that gechel, extinguish it. Avaloi gachel shel eitz, but not if it's a burning piece of wood, if it's a coal of wood. There he can't be mechabed the gachelas. He can put out the flame. He can extinguish this gachelas, even though he's doing it on account of public safety. Now, what is the difference between a glowing piece of metal, a gachelas shel ma'ateches, and a gachelas shel eitz? Explains Rashi. Because with regard to a gachelas shel barzel, shel ma'ateches, of metal, of iron, whatever, there's no kibui there min haTorah. The malacha of kibui min haTorah, of extinguishing a fire, does not apply to a gachelas shel barzel, gachelas shel ma'ateches. It's merely a glowing piece of metal. It's not really considered to be extinguishing a fire. In fact, the Rambam says that even cooking up, heating up this gachelas till it glows, the Rambam says it's considered to be a told of malachas bishul. It's like he's cooking it because he's softening a hard item, a hard piece of material, a hard piece of metal. So it's a lot of bishul. But the Rambam seems to imply that it's not really a malacha of lighting a fire, of mavir, because this is not really considered to be a fire. Here too explains Rashi, extinguishing this fire, this glowing metal, is not a malacha of kibui min haTorah. It is only midrabanan that it's asur. Says Rashi, the Rabbanan set aside their issa the Rabbanan, their shus the Rabbanan, at a time when there's a danger, a nezek l'rabim. They weren't geyser. Therefore, Shmuel tells us, if it is a gachelas shel mateches, it's okay, because he's doing it for public safety, and he may forego issa the Rabbanan in that circumstance. However, a gachelas shel eitz, a burning piece of wood, a coal of wood, putting that out, extinguishing that, would be considered malacha deiraisa, a kibui min haTorah, and therefore cannot be done even on account of public safety. Says more, let's analyze this. If you propose that Savalak Reb Shimon, that Shmuel concurs with Reb Shimon, he holds of Reb Shimon's shita with regard to malachas of Shabbos. If so, afilu shel eitz nami, even if we're speaking about a burning piece of wood, this too should be allowed. Why is that? Because there are actually two halachas which seem to be related, where Reb Shimon holds that in both cases it's not a malacha. Number one was the davar she'ein miskaven, like we spoke until now. If one does a malacha without any kavanah to bring about that malacha, he's doing one act which results in another malacha being done, which wasn't really his intention. According to Reb Shimon, davar she'ein miskaven is mutter. Number two, Reb Shimon also holds that a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa is patur. If one performs a malacha with proper outright intentions to do that malacha, but he doesn't need the malacha for its own sake. He's doing it merely to address a side issue, to avoid a problem. So the point of the malacha here is not to achieve something positive out of the malacha itself. He's not using it to create, to fashion, to build, to achieve a higher design. The classic example of this would be the Mishnah, which discusses the one who is moitzi etz hameitz v'mita. He's moitzi the mace from a shesayachet out to shesarabim. That is a malacha v'eitzah, but that is considered to be a malacha she'eina tzricha. It is not needed legufa for its own sake, because generally speaking, one carries an item into shesarabim, it's because he needs the item there. By the mace, he's merely trying to clear the home of the mace. There's no real positive, constructive goal being achieved by taking the mace into the shesarabim. It's merely to address a concern, to address a problem that we need to clear the home. So there's a machlokes between Reb Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. In a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa, if it is chayv or pater, according to Reb Shimon, it's pater. It is not considered to be a malacha daraisa. According to Reb Shimon, according to Reb Yehuda, it is a malacha daraisa. So once again, there's a machlokes with regard to malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. Rabbi Yehuda says Chai, Reb Shimon says Pater, and the Gemara here relates that discussion, the discussion of Malacha she'eina tzricha legufa, with this discussion of a davar she'ein miskaven. Why? Say to Mepharshim something very interesting. They're both based on a common principle. We know that the Malacha is done in the Mishkan. The Torah describes it as Meleches Machsheves, a Malacha with thought, with planning, with the point, with the goal of achieving something from it, a design, to craft something with it. The Malachas of Shabbos are very much related, are derived from the Malachas HaMishkan. Here too, we need it to be a Melechas Machsheves, something of importance, of significance, to achieve something. Therefore, explain to Mepharshim, both these types of Malachas, A davar she'ein miskaven, and B, a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa, are both based on this concept, on this premise, that a melechas machsheves is required by Shabbos. Therefore, says Rav Shimon, in both cases, these things don't conform to melechas machsheves. A, if he has no intention of doing this malacha altogether, for instance, in the case where he's filling the kettle to warm the water, so what if there's a tziruf that happens, a melechas tziruf, if the kettle hardens? That wasn't his intention. It's not malechas machsheves. There's no kavanah. There's no intent, purpose here. Number two, says Reb Shimon, a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. If he's doing this malacha, he has kavanah to do the malacha. He's taking the mace consciously out to the shesarabim. He has kavanah to do this. It's not something which is happening inadvertently. However, since he doesn't need the goal, the achievement is not what he needs. He doesn't need the mace out there. It's only the point to clear the home. It's not needed for its own sake. It's not accomplishing a constructive goal here, a constructive accomplishment. Therefore, says Reb Shimon, this too does not fall to the confines of a meleches machsheves asra Torah. It's not a malacha to perform, to create, to achieve, to build, to design. Therefore, the Gemara at this point relates these two things together. The Gemara supposes that they're interconnected, interrelated. And if so, the Gemara is a kasha. Once again, if Shmuel concurs with Shitas Reb Shimon with regard to one of these items, with regard to malacha, a davar she'ein miskaven, that is mutter. If so, l'cha'ira, logic says that he would agree with the other one as well, that a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa is also pater. So why then does Shmuel say that one cannot extinguish the ga'achela shel eitzim shesarabim, since it's a malacha d'oraisa, but it's a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa? He doesn't need the kibui here. There's no toyelis, there's no goal being accomplished by putting out this flame for its own sake. For instance, if he was trying to fashion to design a coal here, Oisei Pichamen, Rashi says, or Mahavave Psilish, coming to singe the wick in order to enable it for future use, that kibui, putting out the flame on this wick, where he's doing it to simply to prepare it for future use, or putting out the fire of pechamin when he's trying to create charcoals. There he's trying to accomplish something, he's trying to develop something, he's trying to create something. That kibbutz is melacha shichel gufa. But in our case, he's merely coming to put out the flames so people don't step on it, people don't get harmed. He's doing it on account of public safety. So he's addressing a concern, he's answering a problem. He's not coming to do something constructive here. There's a melacha she'ein shichel gufa. So why does Shmuel forbid it? So once again, if we see that Shmuel holds, like Reb Shimon with regard to filling the kettle, because it's a davar she'ein meskaven and it's mutter, so why with regard to the gacheles does he forbid it? Says the Gemara, you know what? This is actually a middle route. You can hold like one, not like the other. Not necessarily are they connected. Says the Gemara. Once again, if you say Savarlak Reb Shimon, that if Shmuel agrees with Reb Shimon, if so, afilu shleitz nami, even when the gacheles is shleitz, why can't he extinguish it? Says the Gemara. B'davar she'ein meskaven, Savarlak Reb Shimon. If he does a ma'isa and this results in a secondary malacha being done, a incidental malacha, which is subsequent of the initial ma'isa, that is davar she'ein meskaven. He has no kavanah for that, and that is mutter. He holds like Reb Shimon with regard to that halacha. However, b'malacha she'ein shichel gufa, savak Reb Yehuda. In the second halacha, when he does a malacha and he intends on doing this malacha, but the point here is not for its own sake; it's merely coming to address a side issue. With regard to that, he holds like Reb Yehuda. Explain to him first why. Why does he differentiate between both things? Because he holds that if he's doing a malacha and he has kavanah for the malacha, that is a full-fledged malacha, even if it's not tzricha legufa, even if he doesn't need he's not doing it for its own sake. But since he has the intent purpose of doing this malacha, it's considered to be a full-fledged malacha. It's different than davar she'ein meskaven, who has no kavanah to do the malacha whatsoever. He's filling up the kettle to warm the water. He has no kavanah to do the hardening of the kettle. It's not part of his program. Therefore, certainly over there, it's different, and that's not considered to be melechas machshavas. Continues the Gemara, Amar Ravina, Hilkach, if so, that the Rabbanon stepped around the Shvus, they allowed one to forego the Issa the Rabbanon when it accounts for public safety. Hilkach, as a result of that, if one encounters a thorn in Shusarabim, which poses a danger for the passerby, he can carry it in increments of less than 4 amas at a time, which is considered to be a shvus. It's the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon did not allow that for concern that one might actually carry it more than 4 amas. But once again, it's the Rabbanon is mutter on account of public safety. Ube karmelis, if he finds his kites in a karmelis which is neither a shus harabim or a shus hayachid, it's a shus Rabbanon, where carrying in that rishus even more than 4 amas is merely is the Rabbanon. If so, says Ravina, afilu tuva, there he can carry the kites even more than 4 amas at a time, even if he is carrying more than just the pachas daldamas. That's mutter. Why? Because the entire concept of carrying in a karmel is only drabanan, and that is mutter when it is a makayim of hezek rabbin. So in summary, the chacham were matir shvus in a place of hezek when it poses danger for the rabbin, and as a result of that, Shmuel tells us one may extinguish a gachel shel mateches, which is only a drabanan. And Ravina tells us one may carry a kites, b'rishus harabim less than 4 amas at a time, or in a karmel even more than that. Continues the Gemara, Aval Noise. This goes back to the Mishnah. Perhaps let's take a look at the Mishnah. Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. This will be 3 lines from the bottom. The Mishnah concludes with the words Aval Noise is allowed to pour cold water into this kettle, or into a cup or a glass, in a manner where he's only warming up this water. So he's doing it in a manner where the cold water is merely warming up, but not getting to the degree of heat, which would be considered to be bishul. The Gemara here will explain to us the framework, the context of this halach. We learned in a brayz. One may pour hot water into cold water. But one may not pour cold water into hot water. Divrei Beis Shammai, this is the Shita Beis Shammai. And as Rashi explains, Beis Shammai hold that tata, the bottom layer, the bottom level, gavar, that prevails. So when we have a mixture of two liquids, what's going to influence the nature, the temperature of this mixture? It's going to be primarily influenced by the item which was on bottom, on the receiving end. So if he's pouring hot into cold, that's okay, because the bottom liquid, which is cold, will cool off the mixture. However, in the reverse, he can't do that, because if it's cold into hot, so the chamen which are on bottom are going to prevail, are going to cook the liquid that is poured into them. Taisus points out, this not only pertains to a kli rishon, but even to a kli sheni, a secondary kli, which generally is not mavash, doesn't have the power to cook. However, Beis Shammai maintain that too is asur. One may not pour cold into hot, which is in a kli sheni. Says Taisus, the gazri Beis Shammai a geyser kli sheni otu kli rishon. For concern that one may do it even a kli rishon, therefore in any case it is asur. So once again, very simple, according to Beis Shammai, it is tato govar, the bottom one prevails, and one must reckon accordingly. Beis Hillel disagree with this detail. They disagree with the kli sheni aspect. They say, we agree with you with your concept that tato govar, the bottom layer level prevails, and therefore one may not pour cold into hot. That only is applicable to a kli rishon. We don't agree with this added stringency of kli sheni. Once again, bein chamen l'sechat soinen, whether hot into cold, or bein l'sechat chamen, whether cold into hot, mutter, that's allowed. B'medva mamurim b'kos. B'medva mamurim, when is this allowed? B'kos, in a kos which is a kli sheni, there's no concern of bishul in the kos. So even cold into the hot water contained in kli sheni is mutter. One more thing, says Beis Hillel, even though I allow with a kli sheni, but there's one exception. Awal be'ambati, a bath, that has its own category, that is more stringent than a kos. Why, explains Taisus? Since Taisus says, lefi shechamen harbe, it's very hot. Vika lemigzar, there's room for exera here, that the roya, the observer, he'll see that the ambati, the bath, contains such hot water, he'll think that it's actually a kli rishon. And a kli rishon is mavashal. So therefore, we still agree with Beis Shammai by an ambati that even though it's a kli sheni, the restriction applies there, and one may not pour cold into the hot that is contained in this bath, for concern that one might confuse it with a kli rishon. Again, when is this leniency applied? Because only a kais, a cup which is meant to be used for drinking. Aval be'ambati, a bathtub, chamen l'sechat soinen, then only hot into cold, but not in the reverse. But one may not pour cold water into the hot water contained in the bath. So that's the second shita. Beis Hillel generally agree with Beis Shammai's concept that into hot water you may not pour cold water. However, that only applies to a kli rishon. To the primary kli, which was the kli where the water was cooked in, that which has the added heat, it maintains a very high level of heat, and it imparts heat over to its contents. It performs bishul on something which is put into that kli. However, a kli sheni, a secondary kli where the contents were poured into from the initial kli, that kli doesn't have the ability to cook. There's no concern there. However, an ambati is different. As Taisus explains, there's exera there, since it's very hot, it's used for bathing. Perhaps one will think that's a kli rishon, and will infer from there that one may cook with a kli rishon. So Beis Hillel agree that ambati has it in like a kli rishon. Continues the brayso, one more shita. For Reb Shimon ben Manasseh oiser, he prohibits. Now it's not clear what he's referring to. We have two options. One, he could be referring to these last words of Beis Shammai, of Beis Hillel, who tell us that even an ambati, which is more stringent, which has a din of a kli rishon, and therefore one cannot pour cold into the hot that's contained in the ambati. But Beis Hillel told us that only pertains to cold into hot. But if he would like to pour hot water into the cold water contained in the ambati, that certainly is mutter. On that, Reb Shimon adds, no, that too is asur. I don't even allow pouring hot water into the cold water contained in the ambati. Perhaps the Chacham applied a broad decree to the ambati. They don't allow any mixing whatsoever, whether it's this way, whether it's that way. We're concerned about the onlooker, about confusion. They don't allow anything. That's one option. The other option is that Reb Shimon ben Manasseh is not referring to the bath. He's referring back to the initial words of Beis Hillel regarding the kois. Beis Hillel told Beis Shammai, we agree conceptually to the principle of Tatal Gavar, that it is the bottom layer which prevails, and therefore, if the Kli Rishon has hot water, one may not pour cold into that. But that only pertains to Kli Rishon. With regard to a kois, which is only a Kli Sheni, there's no concern there. One may pour the cold into the hot containing Kli Sheni. On that, Shimon Manasseh disagrees. He says a Kli Sheni, a kois, has the same thing like a Kli Rishon, and one may not pour cold into hot water containing even a Kli Sheni. Perhaps that is what Shimon Manasseh is coming to say. The Gemara soon will expound on that. So we have two approaches, two interpretations of the Shita of Shimon Manasseh. Okay, continues the Gemara. Omer Rav Nachman, ha'alocha, we rule, that we paskin like of Shimon Manasseh. Okay, so once again we have three Shitas. We have Beis Shammai, we have Beis Hillel, and we have Rav Shimon Manasseh. Continues the Gemara. Sover Beis Hillel Meimer. Rav Yosef proposed that Seifel, a wash basin, Harayu Kambati, has the same dinner, is equated to a bathtub. Once again, Beis Hillel hold that a Kli Sheni is not a problem unless it's a bathtub. Rav Yosef suggests that a wash basin, it's also used for the washing purposes, and here too, it has the same din like an abati, since the water contained therein is very hot. It has the same thing like an abati, as Taisus says. It's a concern that one might confuse it with a Kli Rishon. So that's Rav Yosef's proposal. He suggests that a seifel, just like an abati, has a din like a Kli Rishon, and one may not pour cold into the hot contained therein. Even according to Beis Hillel. Amalei Abaye, Tani Reb Chia learns in a brayso, no, seifel eina k'ambati. There's no connection between the two. The Isser only applies to Ambati. We regard that as a Kli Rishon, but a Seifel, a wash basin, doesn't have that same status. Okay, so let's just take quick stock of the Gemara up until this point, and then this will enable us to proceed further. We have once again three Shitas of Beis Shammai who tell us Tato Gavar. It is the lower level which prevails. So one may pour hot into cold, because the hot will get cooled off by the cold water when it enters the cold. However, cold into hot, that entails bishul, because the cold will be cooked, will become nisbashal as soon as it comes into contact with the lower level of the hot water, which is tato gavar. Beis Shammai apply this concept to a Kli Rishon and also to a Kli Sheni. Beis Hillel disagree regarding Kli Sheni. They say a Kli Sheni has no such concern, except for the ambati, the bathtub, which is treated like a Kli Rishon. Rav Shimon ben Manasseh says it's asur. What is he speaking about? So let's just assume that he's referring to the ambati, where Beis Hillel say that it has a din of a Kli Rishon. You cannot pour the cold into the hot containing the ambati; it's going to get cooked there. But hot into cold of the ambati, that's okay. Comes Rav Shimon and he says, no, even that's not mutter. I prohibit any sort of mixing with regard to a bathtub. The Chacham applied a gzeira, a light plug, a broad gzeira. One may not mix hot into cold, cold into hot, when we're discussing an ambati. Says the Gemara, Ulamai de Solak Adaite. According to your initial suggestion, Ulamai de Solak Adaite miikar, the Seifel Hariuk Ambati. Rav Yosef suggested, before Abaye brought a right from a brayso, Rabbi Yosef suggested that a seifel, a wash basin, has the same din like an ambati. And just as an ambati is treated like a Kli Rishon, so too a seifel is like a Kli Rishon. Now, what does Rav Shimon hold by ambati? He holds that any mixing is prohibited, and by extension, that principle will apply to a seifel as well. Says the Gemara of Amar of Nachman. So number one, we equate seifel with ambati. Ambati has a din like a Kli Rishon, and so does a seifel, even according to Beis Hillel, right? Okay, that's number one. Number two, V'amar of Nachman, halacha Reb Shimon ben Manasseh. Rav Nachman concluded that the halacha follows Reb Shimon ben Manasseh, who prohibits. What is he coming to prohibit? He's coming to prohibit any sort of mixing in the ambati, and by extension, any sort of mixing in the seifel as well, because they both have the same halacha. Says Gemara, if that's the case, how are you going to wash yourself on Shabbos with hot water? Ella b'Shabbos rechitza b'cham and leka. Is that true that one cannot wash himself with hot water on Shabbos? And we know that's not so. We learned this back on Daf Yomi, that one may use preheated water to bathe himself on Shabbos, as long as it's only part of his body, panav yad raglav, as we learned there. So according to Reb Shimon, who says that any sort of mixing is asur with regard to ampatya, with regard to a seifel as well. So one will not be able to rinse himself on Shabbos, will not be able to wash himself with hot water on Shabbos. And that can't be so. Says the Gemara, we must reinterpret Reb Shimon ben Manasseh. Me Saras, do you maintain that Reb Shimon ben Manasseh has sefer koi? That he's referring to the ambati, the halacha, the halacha mentioned in the last words of Basil. Basil discuss ambatya, that has the din of kli rishon. And therefore Basil say, one may not pour cold into the hot water contained in the ambatya. However, Basil conclude that certainly one may do it in the reverse. He may pour hot into cold of the ambatya. On that, Reb Shimon says, no, that too is asur, because any sort of mixing is asur when it pertains to ambatya, and the Gemara learned by extension to seifel as well. This will leave us stuck. How could somebody wash himself with hot water on Shabbos? Says the Gemara, that's wrong. That's a wrong pirush. That's a wrong interpretation of Reb Shimon ben Manasseh. Mi savers, Reb Shimon ben Manasseh has sefer koi. No, he's not going on the latter part of Basil. Areisha koi. He's going on the former, on the first halacha of Basil. Who tell us? It tells us that a klisheni, like a kois, is mutter. A kois does not have din of a kli rishon, and therefore one may pour cold water into hot water that is contained in a klisheni. And on that disputes Reb Shimon ben Manasseh. He says, I'm chalik on that. I hold that a klisheni, a kois, is equated with a kli rishon, and one may not pour cold water into a klisheni on Shabbos as well. Says once again, Mi Savas, do you propose Reb Shimon ben Manasseh sefer koi is going to halacha ambati, and he forbids any sort of mixing? No, areisha koi. He's going on the first part of Basil, which is Basil oimrim, Basil matirin, bein chamen lesoich tzoinen. Basil allow by a klisheni, a kois, whether he's pouring the hot into the cold, or bein tzoinen lesoich chamen, whether he's pouring the cold into the hot, because a klisheni is not mavashal. They don't agree with Beis Shammai, who prohibits even a klisheni. On that, says Reb Shimon ben Manasseh Oyser, he holds that one may not pour cold into hot, even if it's contained in a klisheni. So everything's good and fine, because with regard to rechitza on Shabbos, a simple solution: let him go ahead and dilute the water in this manner, pour the hot into the cold. Even if Shimon agrees that's mutter, even if it's an ambati, even if it's a seifel. Reb Shimon is not discussing mixing it in that manner. Reb Shimon is only coming to disagree with Beis Shammai's heter that a kois, a klisheni, is not a problem. One may mix, one may pour cold into the water in klisheni. Says Reb Shimon, no, I disagree with that. So this concurs with Shittas Beis Shammai, who didn't differentiate between klish and klisheni. They held that always tatal gavar, the bottom layer prevails. One may not pour cold into the hot contained either in a kli rishon or in a klisheni. Says the Gemara, leima, okay? If so, are you going to say Reb Shimon ben Manasseh, Dama ke Beis Shammai, that Reb Shimon ben Manasseh is following the shita of Beis Shammai, would disallow pouring cold into the hot of a klisheni, and that can't be so. The halacha doesn't follow Beis Shammai. Says the Gemara, Achikama, this is what he meant to say. Lo nechlaku Beis Shammai Basil b'davar zeh. What Reb Shimon means to say is, I'm not coming to disagree with Basil. I maintain that unlike the first version of the Brisa, where there was a machlokes in this regard, I maintain there was never a machlokes in this regard. Beis Shammai and Basil never disputed this halacha. Meaning, Basil also agreed to Beis Shammai that one may not pour cold into hot water, even if it's contained in a kli sheni. Continues the Gemara. Omar Rafuna b'der Shua. Chazini leil Rava. I observed Rava, the loy kaped amana. He's not particular with the vessel, meaning he allows one to pour cold water onto the hot water contained in the Kli Sheni. How do I know that? How does he know that? What did Rava base his halacha on? He based it on the Brisa. As Reb Chia told us in the Brisa. Noisin Adam, Kiton Shamayim, one may place a pitcher of cold water, let's say Seifel Shamayim, into a wash basin of water, which contains water, whether bein chamen, whether it's hot, bein chamen, let's say tzoyin, whether he's pouring the hot water into the cold water of the basin, or in the reverse, or bein tzoyin, let's say chamen, whether he's pouring cold water into hot water, there's no concern because it's a Kli Sheni. How could you bring a riot from that brisa to allow one to pour cold water into chamen, into hot water in a Kli Sheni? Perhaps that brisa is different. Dilma, perhaps. Shani Asam, the mifsikli. What is the brisa speaking about? The brisa says, Noisan Adam, Kitayin Shalmayim, a container with water, let's say Sefer Shalmayim, into a wash basin. So there is a kli there. He's not directly pouring the one liquid into the other. There is a kli which is interrupting, which is being mafsik, because the cold water is contained in a container. Amar Leis, he told him Ma'ara Itmar. We actually learned that he poured it. Ma'ara Adam, the brisa is meant to be read as follows. Ma'ara Adam, Kitan Shamayim. One may pour the water from a container, let's say Seifel Shamayim, into a Seifel of Mayim, whether it's hot into cold, or Bein Tzoyin Chamen, whether cold into hot. So the brisa clearly states that one may actually pour the water from the Kitan into the Seifel, even though he is pouring cold into hot. Since the Seifel is a Kli Sheni, there's no concern, and this is in accordance with Shitas Bisila. So once again, the summary on the sugi is as follows: pouring water, iri mayim, sometimes is allowed and sometimes not allowed. We have Beis Shammai, we have Beis Hillel, we have Rosh Shimon. Then we'll take that and go back to our Mishnah and try to interpret our Mishnah accordingly. Let's start with Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai say, when is pouring allowed? Only if it is chamen l'soich tzoinin, hot into cold, because the bottom layer of cold water, the ta'ata, is governed. That prevails. That sets the tone. That influences the temperature of this mixture, and the hot water poured in the cold will end up cooling off and won't be mavashal the tzoinin. What about in the reverse? Cold into hot. That's usher, regardless of whether it's a Kli Rishon or not. Filu b'Kli Sheni. The only time it's allowed is if he pours a large amount at once, which will simply result in the mixture getting warmed up and not getting cooked whatsoever. According to Beis Hillel, they agree with the concept of Beis Shammai that the bottom level of the Tata Govar, that supersedes, that prevails. However, they hold that this restriction is only to a Kli Rishon, not a Kli Sheni. Therefore, according to Beis Hillel, which one is mutter? Chamen l'tzoich tzoinin, hot into cold, certainly, and even tzoyin l'tzoich chamen, cold into hot, is mutter if it's a Kli Sheni. When do they aser? When do they prohibit? If it's an ambati, a bath, tzoyin l'tzoich chamen is aser if we're pouring into the hot water contained in a bath. Reb Shimon maintains there was never a machlekes. Beis Hillel always agreed with Beis Shammai that the concept of ta'ato govar, the prohibition of pouring cold into hot, applies even to a Kli Sheni. Now, let's go back to our Mishnah. Based on this discussion, let's go back and explain the halacha in our Mishnah. The Mishnah said, once again, perhaps let's take a quick look. Mishnah Daf Yomi Aleph, 3 lines from the bottom. Aval noisin l'seichei, or l'seich hakois. One may pour cold into a kettle or into a cup, kedei la'afshiran, which will result in the mixture with the water merely warming up. So the Mishnah tells us that one may pour cold into a kois. Now, what is the scenario? What is the context of this heter? So let's go back to our Gemara. We have two options. It depends on the shittas. The heter will apply differently according to Beis Shammai than according to Beis Hillel. According to Beis Shammai, the only way this is allowed is if he pours a large amount of cold into the hot water, into the hot water contained in the kois, which will result in the mixture merely warming up, because just a little bit cold into the hot of the kois will result in bishul. Because even though the kois is a Kli Sheni, Beis Shammai prohibit pouring cold into the hot containing Kli Sheni on account of a Gzera d'Rabbanan. So evidently our Mishnah is discussing a case where he's pouring a large amount of cold So this will never result in any concept of bishul. There's no gzera to be applied here. It doesn't even relate to bishul. It's merely warming up. It's not getting to any high degree of heat. Therefore, there's no, even Issa Rabbanan will not apply here. According to Beis Hillel, it's very straightforward. One may pour even a little bit of cold into the hot water contained in a cup, into a kais, because the kais is a klisheni, and klisheni is not mavashal, and it's mutter even with Rabbanan. Okay, continues the Mishnah. Ha'ilfa is a frying pan, ba'kedera, or a pot, she'evira murusachin, which were removed off the fire, taken off the fire. Rashi says ben hashmashes, so right in the beginning of Shabbos. So they're still hot, they're still boiling. Merutachin, they still have the degree of heat, which is considered to be yad seledesbo, as we learned in the Gemara. The Gemara Daf Yomi Shabbos, the hand recoils. That is the degree, the sufficient level of heat, which can accomplish bishul, can cook. So therefore, the Mishnah tells us, lo yitein l'seichen tavlin. One may not add seasoning to these containers, to this pot, which has the food, the content which is still boiling, because the tavlin, the seasoning, could get cooked. But once he transfers the content from the pot onto a secondary vessel, onto klisheni is not mavashal, and he can place some seasoning there. He can place seasoning into the bowl, or into the serving plate, which is a klisheni. He can put seasoning, he can add seasoning to anything that he desires, to any pot, chutz, except midavar sheyesh bechametz v'tzir, a dish, a pot which contains a dish which has chametz, vinegar, v'tzir, or brine. These are acidic substances which enable the hot food to accomplish a bishul, to cook. Therefore, a dish that contains either chametz and tzir has the ability to cook, and one indeed may not add seasoning to that dish. If it is hot, as we mentioned before, it is yatzaledesboy. Now we're unclear as to the intent of Rabbi Yehuda. It says in Mori Boilu, they asked the following question: what is Rabbi Yehuda referring to? Rabbi Yehuda Areishakai. Now the Mishnah had two clauses. We began with a klirishan, where the concept of bishul applies, and we concluded with klisheni, where the concept of bishul doesn't apply. Now Rabbi Yehuda tells us that one may add seasoning unless there's chametz or tzir present. Is he coming to be makel? Is he coming to be more lenient? He's saying, well, even a klirishan is not mavashal unless there's chametz v'tzir and is extra sharp, extra acidic. Therefore, with regard to tavlin, Tosfos points out, we're speaking about seasoning specifically. Tavlin will not get cooked, even by placing it in a klirishan, unless there's chametz v'tzir present there. So Rav Yehuda is coming to be makel. Rav Yehuda Areisha Koy Lekula is coming to offer a leniency, to state a kula that even with regard to klirisha, there's no concern with regard to adding seasoning, unless it's chametz v'tzir. Or idilma seifa koy lechumra. Or is he referring to the seifa, but we're speaking about a klisheni, which is not mavashal? Says Rav Yehuda, no, a klisheni too, that also has the ability to cook. And one may not put the seasoning there, and the seasoning if the klisheni contains a dish which has chametz v'tzir. So once again, is he coming to offer a leniency or a stringency? Is he coming to say that the klirishan, which is off the fire, it does not have ability to cook the tavlin unless the content has chametz v'tzir, it's extra sharp, extra acidic? Or is he coming to be machmer? He's coming to say one may not add seasoning even to a klisheni, which is extra sharp, extra acidic, if it has the chametz v'tzir. Tashma, come and listen. This sounding we learned in the Brayser, Rav Yehuda Omer, l'kol ilfesin u'noisein. One may add seasoning to any sort of frying pan, l'chol hakaderis roischus u'noisein, to any boiling pot. He can add seasoning, chutz midavar sheyesh bo chametz v'tzir, except if the dish contains vinegar or brine, and it has the acidity of these ingredients, which which give the ability, which enable the dish to cook. So indeed, Rav Yehuda is coming to be makel to apply a leniency, a kula here, and allow adding seasoning even to a klirishan, even to a kli provided that it doesn't contain the chaymis v'tzir. So Rav Yehuda is allowing adding seasoning to kli, but we must point out that we're speaking about the kli that's already off the flame. Continues the Gemara. What about cooking salt? So Rav Yosef figured, melach haru ketavlin. Melach is equated, it has the halachic status of seasoning. The bekli bashla, that in the kli it will get cooked, ubekli sheni le bashla. But in the kli it will not get cooked, so it will have the same din as seasoning. Amali Abaye, Tani Reb Chia teaches us in a brayso that melach ain't a ketavlin. Melach is more sensitive, it's more delicate, it's more susceptible to heat and to getting cooked than merely seasoning. And with regard to melach, the bekli sheni nami bashla, it even cooks in a kli sheni. So one must conduct himself more stringently with regard to melach. Tavlin, that depends if it's kli and kli sheni. Melach, even a kli sheni can cook it. It's interesting, we had a similar dialogue between Rav Yosef and Abaye and Amar Aleph. We had Savar Rav Yosef that Seifel is Kambati, and Abaye responded to Rav Chia, no it's not. Here too we have Savar Rav Yosef that melach is like tavlin, and Abaye responded with a brayso, it's not so. Okay, so once again, Rav Yosef suggested that melach and tavlin have the same halacha. In the kli it's a problem, in kli it's not. Abaye says no, melach is more sensitive, even putting it in a kli will result in bishul. Continues the Gemara, Upliga Rav Nachman, Abaye, who maintains that melach is more delicate than tavlin, he disagrees. He's chaylik Rav Nachman, who tells us just the opposite. Rav Nachman, tzricha milcha bishula. Salt is so resilient, it's so resistant to heat. It needs such an intense level of cooking. Tzricha milcha. Salt requires bishula, an intense degree of cooking, kivisra the Torah, like the meat of an ox. And even putting in a kli is not a problem, unless it's actually on the fire and cooking on the fire. So we have three opinions with regard to melach. We have Rav Yosef, we have Abaye, and Rav Nachman. Rav Yosef says melach has the same halacha tavlin, and a kli but it cooks, and a kli it doesn't. According to Abaye, even in a kli it can cook. According to Rav Nachman, even in a kli if it's off the fire, it will not cook the salt. There's another approach, another version with regard to the opinion of Abaye. Once again, Savar Rav Yosef Meimar, Rav Yosef proposed melach haru ketavlin. Melach is like tavlin, the bekli b'sheila, kli sheni loy b'sheila, that only cooks in a kli not kli sheni. So melach and tavlin go hand in hand. Amali Abaye, no. Tani Rav Chia taught us melach ain't a ketavlin. Melach is more resilient than seasoning. The bekli rishon nami lo b'sheila. It doesn't even cook in a kli. V'hainu the Rav Nachman, and this indeed concurs with Rav Nachman, who said that tzricha milcha bishula, that salt needs a high level of cooking. Kivisra Torah, like the meat of an ox, and even in a kli it will not get cooked unless it's directly on the fire. So once again, we have various substances. We have the tavlin, we have the melach. What is the halacha with regard to bishul? So tavlin, seasoning, according to Tanna Kama, in the kli it becomes nisbashal, in the kli sheni not. Rav Yehuda maintains no. Even in a kli it won't get cooked unless it contains chaymitz, vinegar, v'tzir, or brine. What about melach? We have Rav Yosef, who tells us melach and tavlin go hand in hand. It can only be cooked in a kli not in a kli sheni. According to Rav Nachman, even in a kli the melach won't get cooked unless it's directly on the fire. Abaye, we have two versions. According to version number one, he holds just the opposite. Melach is more delicate and sensitive and tender, and it gets affected easily by heat, and it can get cooked even in a kli sheni. According to the second version of the Gemara, Abaye concurs with Rav Nachman that no, melach is more resistant to heat than mere seasoning, and the only way to cook it is if it's in kli on the fire. Continues the Mishnah. Ein noisen kli tachas haner. When we not place a kli, for instance, a bowl underneath a lamp, lekabel b'is Hashem, to collect the dripping oil. What's wrong with doing that? Explains Rashi. Because the shemen, the oil, is muktzah. Why is the shemen muktzah? So the Mepharshim give us a number of reasons. We have a choice of three reasons. Either it's muktzah because it's designated for the lamp, and one may not draw from that oil on Shabbos, as we learned earlier in the Masechta. One who draws from the oil in the lamp, he's doing a malach of mechabe, because he's weakening the power of the lamp, of the flame. So this oil that's in the lamp is going to stay there. It's muktzah. Number two, because perhaps the oil is also a basis. It provides a basis, a foundation, a support for the davar asr, for the flame, which is a davar asr. So it becomes muktzah on that account. Number three, if we're speaking about an Ner Shabbos, so the oil is huktzil mitzvah, it's designated to be used exclusively for the mitzvah. Therefore, this oil, for whatever reason, is muktzah. Placing a kli underneath to collect this oil is also not allowed. Rashi gives us two reasons. Number one, because a kli cannot be moved for the sake of muktzah. Just as we may not move muktzah, may not use muktzah on Shabbos. Muktzah is off limits. It's designated for non-Shabbos uses. One may not use it on Shabbos. Similarly, one may not take a kli, move it in order to service a dvar muktzah, an item which is muktzah. Rashi says, "Ein kli nital," a kli may not be taken b'Shabbos ella litzorech, to service, to help, to aid and assist, litzorech davar hanital, to help and service something which is not muktzah, something which can be moved. So just like you can't use the muktzah itself, you can't move the muktzah itself, you cannot take something else and move it to service that muktzah item. So the muktzah item, its use, and anything that is used for it is off limits on Shabbos. One may not take a kli to use that for a muktzah. Therefore, you can't take the kli and place it under the ner to collect the muktzah oil. That's one reason. Another reason, says Rashi, because by placing this bowl underneath the lamp, he's going to nullify the use of this bowl. Because once the oil drips in there, he can't use this bowl any longer. Says Rashi, one cannot do that. Asur levatel kli meichane. One cannot nullify the use of the kli from its designated use. He cannot nullify its use on Shabbos. Why? Says Rashi, because it's like he's koivei lo mokim. It's as though he's cementing it into place. He's putting it down. He's leaving it there. He can't move it. It's like baina. There's another Rashi elsewhere in Shabbos says it's like soiser, because he's like dismantling the kli. He's nullifying its use. So any angle which we adopt, this is an isser, and this is the reason. These are the reasons why he cannot place this kli under the oil to collect it on Shabbos. So once again, says the Mishnah, "Ein noisen kli tachas haner lekal beis Hashem." Ve'im, continues the Mishnah, ve'im nosnu b'yom. If he placed it before Shabbos, mutter, certainly that's mutter. Taisus points out that even lechatchila he's allowed to do that. Ve'ein noisen memeno, but he cannot derive hana, pleasure, from the oil contained therein. Why? Lefisha ein min hamuchan, because it's not prepared for Shabbos, it's muktzah. Amar Rav Chisda, afal bisha amru, although we say, ein noisen kli tachas hanegoyin lekabel beit sasa. So Rav Chisda here is interpreting the Mishnah based on the first reason, that one may not be noitel kli on Shabbos. He cannot pick up a kli to use it as a service to aid and assist something which is muktzah. Therefore, says Rav Chisda, even though Chacham told us, Aval Bisha Amru, Ein noisen kli tachas hanegolos, one may not take a kli and place it underneath the hen, lekabel beit sasa, to collect this egg. He knows the hen is going to lay an egg. He's going to place a kli there to collect the egg, so it doesn't roll away and crack. So one may not do that. Why? Because the egg is muktzah. This is discussed in the beginning of Maseches Beitza for a number of reasons. The egg which is laid on Shabbos is muktzah. So certainly one may not take a kli to place it underneath the hen to collect the egg, which is muktzah, because once again, he's not allowed to be metaltal a kli for the sake of a muktzah. So although that's a fact, but there is an allowance in the following case. Once the egg is laid, he can take a kli and cover over the egg, turn it upside down over the egg, to protect the shleita shavar so that it doesn't get trampled upon. Even though in this case as well, he seems like he's moving a kli, he's taking a kli, for what? To service a muktzah item. Amar Rabba, indeed, what is the reason for this? What is the difference between one case and the other? My time with the Rav Chisda, what is the Reason here? Because Rav Chisda holds, Tarnagoylis asuyo lahato beitzasa ba'ashpa. A tarnagoylis is liable. It is common for the tarnugol to lay its egg in an ashba, in a heap of trash or similar location, where it is liable to get trampled upon by passerby and get damaged. But it's not common for the egg for the hen to lay its egg in a mokim madron, in a place of incline where the egg will roll away and crack. There's not such a that concern is not so real. That's not so common. So once again, tarnagoles asuya lahato beitzasa. It is common for the tarnagol to lay its egg be'ashpa, in a heap of trash in a public area. We will get trampled upon, and one needs to take the proper precaution to protect the egg. But however, it's not common that the egg will be laid, that the tarnagolis would lay its egg lahato beitzasa, but makom madron, incline where the egg will roll away and crack. Therefore, it says Rabbah, V'atzola mitzuya hitiru. The Chacham allowed one to take a precaution on account of a common loss. Hatzola mitzuya, something which is common, which is a common occurrence. They allowed, even if he's going to be metaltel a kli litzora for the sake of a muktzah, because that is also considered to be part of the Shabbos need. What's the point? What's the issur of muktzah? It's designated for non-Shabbos use. For instance, a hammer, which is designated to knock in a nail, a saw, etc. These things are not designated for Shabbos. They're meant to be used for malachas. Just as we're not metaltal those muktzah items, they're off limits, they're out of bounds. We're not metaltal them, and we're not metaltal something for their sake as well. Getting involved in the muktzah item itself, or coming to service it, that's all part of muktzah. That's out of bounds, out of the realm of the ordinary Shabbos use, of the Shima Shabbos. That's not considered to be a Shabbos need, a Shabbos Shimush, that's muktzah. So the muktzah itself, or servicing the muktzah. However, if it's a hatzola mitzuya, if it's a precaution that is something which a person it needs to commonly take, it is something which is a common occurrence, that falls into the realm of an ordinary Shabbos use, and that is not muktzah. Therefore, explains Rabbah, one may be metaltal a kli for this purpose, because this is something which is a common occurrence on Shabbos, that falls into the context of an ordinary, a common Shabbos use, a need of Shabbos. That's not muktzah. Once again, about Vatzola Metsuya Tiru, something which is common, a precaution required for a common occurrence, for a common loss, they will matter. So therefore, you can be metaltal kli to cover up the egg which was laid in a public area and make it trampled upon. However, to take a precaution hatzola for the sake of an uncommon loss, like if you're concerned that the egg will roll away down the incline, that's not something common. That's not a common occurrence. That will happen. It's not common for the tarnagolis to lay his egg in that manner, which will roll away. So that's not considered to be a common occurrence, a common ordinary Shabbos need. And therefore, this falls into the category of muktzah. He cannot be metaltal kli for that muktzah item. Once again, just as he can't be metaltal the muktzah itself, the egg itself, he cannot come and service that egg using another kli. That's considered to be part of the muktzah. It's within the realm of muktzah. It relates to the muktzah item. It's not part of a Shabbos use, and therefore it is usur to be metaltal kli for that purpose. Explains Rashi that explains our Mishnah as well, that placing the kli under the shemen coming out of the ner, that too, says Rashi, is not a hatzola mitzuya. It's not a common thing. It's not a common need. It's not considered to be an ordinary Shabbos need, and therefore, since the shemen is muktzah, one may not be metaltal kli to service that muktzah oil. Continues the Gemara, Esvei Abaye. So Abaye asked the kasha, how can you say that is the benchmark, whether it's mitzuya or not mitzuya? V'atzola she'eina mitzuya lo yitiru? Are you going to propose that to take a precaution on account of an uncommon loss that cannot be done? V'atani, but haven't we learned? Nishbar lo yichavish al tevel b'rish gagai. One who had a barrel which contained the tevel food, which is muktzah, because it cannot be eaten on Shabbos. So if that barrel breaks, maybe kli can go rushing and bring a kli, and place it underneath to collect the items that are coming out of the chavis, even though the tevel is muktzah, and a cracking chavis is not something which is common. So how can he do that? He's being metaltal kli l'tzoyrich muktzah, and it's not something which is common. Says Gemara, indeed this is common. B'gufi chadati, was speaking about new earthenware chavis, new earthenware barrels, which are the shchichi, the pocket is common for them to burst, and therefore this is considered to be a common loss, a common occurrence. Eis v'hi another kasha. Noisin kli tachas hanel kablan tzotzis. One may place a kli under the nair to collect these sparks which are flying. Nitzotzis is not shchiach, and even though the nitzotzis are muktzah, how can we allow him to take a kli to collect those muktzah items? He's servicing muktzah, even though it's not something which is shchiach. It's not something which is mitzvah, which is common. It says the Gemara, yes, nitzotzis is not mishchichi, that too is something which is common, and it falls into the category of hatzolah mitzvah. Now Tosfos points out something very interesting, that actually dripping oil is more common than flying sparks. So why didn't the Gemara say that the dripping oil is not something which is hatzolah mitzvah, and the flying sparks is considered to be hatzolah mitzvah? Says Tosfos, just the opposite. Since the dripping oil is so common, it is common practice to place the kli under the dripping oil, under the nair from Erev Shabbos. He anticipates the dripping oil, so he places the kli there on Erev Shabbos. So comes Shabbos, it's not something which is pertinent. It's not common. It's not a common necessity on Shabbos. It's not an ordinary need on Shabbos itself, because the kli is generally placed there from before Shabbos. So once again, this doesn't fall into the category of a Shabbos need, of a Shabbos tzorich, of a shemesh of Shabbos. Therefore, it falls into the category of muktzah. And why not be metaltal a kli for this purpose? For the purpose of collecting this muktzah oil, since he's servicing the muktzah, which the oil which is muktzah, so it falls into the realm of a shemush muktzah, and it's asur. And since it's something which is uncommon, this need is not something which is common. It is not allowed. However, since the flying sparks, even though it's actually not so common for sparks to go flying in the house, that he should need to protect his home from the flying sparks. Nevertheless, the status is just the opposite. Quite the contrary, since it's not so common, he's not liable to go put the kli there from Erev Shabbos. He's not inclined to do that. Therefore, comes Shabbos when he sees flying sparks, there's no kli there. So indeed, this is considered to be a need of Shabbos, a tzorich of Shabbos. It's hatzolah mitzvah. It's common. It is common to encounter this problem on Shabbos, because it does happen that sparks go flying, and generally speaking, there's no kli there. So therefore, this is considered to be a hatzolah mitzvah. So it's just the opposite. Even though the sparks are less common than the oil, but to have sparks flying on Shabbos is more common than having oil drip on Shabbos. Okay, let's take a chazar of today's daf. We began with a heter of a shvus in a makam hezek. I'm allowed one to do an isur drabanan on account of protecting the public. One may extinguish a gachel shalmateches, a glowing piece of metal in shusarabim. One may transfer the kites, which is lying in shusarabim, if he takes it less than 4 amas at a time, which is drabanan. In a karmelis, one may carry even a longer, a filu harbi, even more than 4 amas. What about mixing water, hot and cold? According to Beis Shammai, only hot into cold, but not cold into hot, even if it's a klisheni. According to Beis Hillel, hot into cold is mutter, and cold into hot is mutter if it's a klisheni, unless it's an ambati. Tosfos says it's generally very hot. One may confuse it with a klirishin. Reb Shimon maintains there was never such a machlekes. We still agreed with Beis Shammai that we always apply the concept of ta'ato gavar, the bottom layer prevails, and therefore tzoyne and l'sochamen is asur, even a klisheni. The Mishnah tells us one may pour some cold into the kais, into the hot water contained in a kais. According to Beis Shammai, how do we interpret this halacha? He's going to pour a large amount of cold into the kais, which will not allow it to get cooked. It only will get slightly warm, and therefore, even though it's a klisheni is asur midrabanan when he pours cold into hot. It won't apply in this case, since he's pouring a large amount of water where it only slightly warms up. According to Beis Hillel, very simple. He may pour cold into the hot of a klisheni, into the kais, because it's only a klisheni. There's no issur to do that whatsoever. We learned regarding bishul, of tavlin, of seasoning, of salt. Tavlin, according to the Tanakama, will get cooked in a klirishin, not a klisheni. According to Rabbi Yehuda, even in a klirishin, it's not a problem, as long as unless it has chaymis v'tzir, vinegar or brine, when it's very sharp and acidic. What about melach? According to Rav Yosef, melach has the same din of tavlin. In a klirishin, it's bashal. In a klisheni, not. According to Rav Nachman, even in a klirishin, it won't get cooked unless it's directly on the fire. Abaye, we had two versions. Either he holds that melach is very delicate, even in the klisheni, it will get cooked. And the second version was that he agrees with Rav Nachman, that even in the kli rishon, it's not a problem unless it's directly on the fire. We proceeded with the Mishnah, which taught us that just as one may not be metaltal muktzah itself, one may not be metaltal kli to service the muktzah. The Gemara told us, concluded that, according to Rava's interpretation of Chizda, this is allowed when it is for the sake of a hatzola mitzuya, when he's coming to save something, he's taking a precaution for a common loss. In that case, the tiltal of a kli is mutter. That too is considered to be a Shabbos needed, Tzarech Shabbos, a Shimush of Shabbos, and is not usher on account of muktzah.